The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Law 26. Keep your hands clean. Judgment. You must seem a paragon of civility and efficiency. Your hands never soiled by mistakes and nasty deeds. Maintain such a spotless appearance by using others as scapegoats and cat's paws to disguise your involvement. Part 1. Conceal your mistake. Have a scapegoat around to take the blame. Our good name and reputation depend more on what we conceal than on what we reveal. Everyone makes mistakes, but those who are truly clever manage to hide them and to make sure someone else is blamed. A convenient scapegoat should always be kept around for such moments. Observance of the Law 1. Near the end of the 2nd century AD, as China's mighty Han Empire slowly collapsed, the great general and imperial minister Cao emerged as the most powerful man in the country. Seeking to extend his power base and to rid himself of the last of his rivals, Cao began a campaign to take control of the strategically vital Central Plain. During the siege of a key city, he slightly miscalculated the timing for supplies of grain to arrive from the capital. As he waited for the shipment to come in, the army ran low on food, and Cao was forced to order the chief of commissariat to reduce its rations. Cao kept a tight rein on the army and ran a network of informers. His spies soon reported that the men were complaining, grumbling that he was living well while they themselves had barely enough to eat. Perhaps Cao was keeping the food for himself, they murmured. If the grumbling spread, Cao could have a mutiny on his hands. He summoned the chief of commissariat to his tent. "I want to ask you to lend me something, and you must not refuse," Cao told the chief. "What is it?" the chief replied. "I want the loam of your head to show to the troops," said Cao. "But I've done nothing wrong," cried the chief. "I know," said Cao with a sigh. "But if I do not put you to death, there will be a mutiny. Do not grieve after you're gone. I'll look after your family." Put this way, the request left the chief no choice, so he resigned himself to his fate and was beheaded that very day. Seeing his head on public display, the soldiers stopped grumbling. Some saw through Cao's gesture but kept quiet, stunned and intimidated by his violence. And most accepted his version of who was to blame, preferring to believe in his wisdom and fairness than in his incompetence and cruelty. Interpretation. Cao came to power in an extremely tumultuous time. In the struggle for supremacy in the crumbling Han Empire, enemies had emerged from all sides. The battle for the Central Plain had proven more difficult than he imagined, and money and provisions were a constant concern. No wonder that, under such stress, he had forgotten to order supplies in time. Once it became clear that the delay was a critical mistake, and that the army was seething with mutiny, Cao had two options: apology and excuses, or a scapegoat. Understanding the workings of power and the importance of appearances as he did, Cao did not hesitate for a moment. He shopped around for the most convenient head and had it served up immediately. Occasional mistakes are inevitable. The world is just too unpredictable. People of power, however, are undone, not by the mistakes they make, but by the way they deal with them. Like surgeons, they must cut away the tumor with speed and finality. Excuses and apologies are much too blunt tools for this delicate operation. The powerful avoid them. By apologizing, you open up all sorts of doubts about your competence, your intentions, any other mistakes you may not have confessed. Excuses satisfy no one, and apologies make everyone uncomfortable. The mistake does not vanish with an apology. It deepens and testers. Better to cut it off instantly, distract attention from yourself, and focus attention on a convenient scapegoat before people have time to ponder your responsibility or your possible incompetence. Observance of the Law 2. For several years, Cesare Borgia campaigned to gain control of large parts of Italy in the name of his father, Pope Alexander. In the year 1500, he managed to take Romagna, in northern Italy. The region had for years been ruled by a series of greedy masters who had plundered its wealth for themselves. Without police or any disciplining force, it had descended into lawlessness, whole areas being ruled by robbers and feuding families. To establish order, Cesare appointed a lieutenant general of the region, Ramiro de Orio, a cruel and vigorous man, according to Niccolò Machiavelli. Cesare gave the Orco absolute powers. With energy and violence, De Orco established a severe, brutal justice in Romagna and soon rid it of almost all of its lawless elements. But in his zeal, he sometimes went too far, and after a couple of years, the local population resented and even hated him. In December of 1502, Cesare took decisive action. He first let it be known that he had not approved of De Orco's cruel and violent deeds, which stemmed from the lieutenant's brutal nature. Then, on December 22nd, he imprisoned De Orco in the town of Cesena. And the day after Christmas, the townspeople awoke to find a strange spectacle in the middle of the piazza. De Orco's headless body, dressed in a lavish suit with a purple cape, the head impaled beside it on a pike, the bloody knife and executioner's block laid out beside the head. As Machiavelli concluded his comments on the affair, the ferocity of this scene left the people at once stunned and satisfied. Interpretation. Cesare Borgia was a master player in the game of power, always planning several moves ahead. He set his opponents the cleverest traps. For this, Machiavelli honored him above all others in The Prince. Cesare foresaw the future with amazing clarity in Romagna. Only brutal justice would bring order to the region. The process would take several years, and at first the people would welcome it, but it would soon make many enemies, and the citizens would come to resent the imposition of such unforgiving justice, especially by outsiders. Cesare himself, then, could not be seen as the agent of this justice. The people's hatred would cause too many problems in the future, and so he chose the one man who could do the dirty work, knowing in advance that once the task was done, he would have to display De Orco's head on a pike. The scapegoat in this case had been planned from the beginning, with Ciao. The scapegoat was an entirely innocent man. In the Romagna, he was the offensive weapon in Cesare's arsenal that let him get the dirty work done without bloodying his own hands. With this second kind of scapegoat, keys to power. The use of scapegoats is as old as civilization itself, and examples of it can be found in cultures around the world. The main idea behind these sacrifices is the shifting of guilt and sin to an outside figure, object, animal, or man, which is then banished or destroyed. The Hebrews used to take a live goat, hence the term scapegoat, upon whose head the priest would lay both hands while confessing the sins of the children of Israel. Having thus had those sins transferred to it, the beast would be led away and abandoned in the wilderness. With the Athenians and the Aztecs, the scapegoat was human, often a person fed and raised for the purpose, since famine and plague were thought to be visited on humans by the gods in punishment for wrongdoing. The people suffered not only from the famine and plague themselves, but from blame and guilt. They freed themselves of guilt by transferring it to an innocent person, whose death was intended to satisfy the divine powers and banish the evil from their midst. It is an extremely human response to not look inward after a mistake or crime, but rather to look outward and to affix blame and guilt on a convenient object. When the plague was ravaging Thebes, Oedipus looked everywhere for its cause, everywhere except inside himself and his own sin of incest, which had so offended the gods and occasioned the plague. This profound need to exteriorize one's guilt, to project it on another person or object, has an immense power, which the clever know how to harness. Sacrifice is a ritual, perhaps the most ancient ritual of all. Ritual, too, is a wellspring of power. In the killing of de Orco, note Caesare's symbolic and ritualistic display of his body. By framing it in this dramatic way, he focused guilt outward. The citizens of Romagna responded instantly. Because it comes so naturally to us to look outward rather than inward, we readily accept the scapegoat's guilt. The bloody sacrifice of the scapegoat seems a barbaric relic of the past, but the practice lives on to this day, if indirectly and symbolically, since power depends on appearances, and those in power must seem never to make mistakes. The use of scapegoats is as popular as ever. What modern leader will take responsibility for his blunders? He searches out others to blame, a scapegoat to sacrifice. When Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution failed miserably, he made no apologies or excuses to the Chinese people. Instead, like Zhao before him, he offered up scapegoats, including his own personal secretary and high-ranking member of the party, Chen Pota.
For 20 years then, his secretary, Louis Hao, played the role de Orco had. He handled the backroom deals, the manipulation of the press, the underhanded campaign maneuvers. And whenever a mistake was committed, or a dirty trick contradicting Roosevelt's carefully crafted image became public, Hao served as the scapegoat and never complained. Besides conveniently shifting blame, a scapegoat can serve as a warning to others. In 1631, a plot was hatched to oust France's Cardinal Richelieu from power, a plot that became known as the Day of the Dupes. It almost succeeded, since it involved the upper echelons of government, including the Queen Mother. But through luck and his own connivances, Richelieu survived. One of the key conspirators was a man named Marillac, the keeper of the seals. Richelieu could not imprison him without implicating the Queen Mother, an extremely dangerous tactic, so he targeted Marillac's brother, a marshal in the army. This man had no involvement in the plot. Richelieu, however, afraid that other conspiracies might be in the air, especially in the army, decided to set an example. He tried the brother on trumped-up charges and had him executed. In this way, he indirectly punished the real perpetrator, who had thought himself protected, and warned any future conspirators that he would not shrink from sacrificing the innocent to protect his own power. In fact, it is often wise to choose the most innocent victim possible as a sacrificial goat. Such people will not be powerful enough to fight you, and their naive protests may be seen as protesting too much. May be seen, in other words, as a sign of their guilt. Be careful, however, not to create a martyr. It is important that you remain the victim, the poor leader, betrayed by the incompetence of those around you. If the scapegoat appears too weak and his punishment too cruel, you may end up the victim of your own device. Sometimes you should find a more powerful scapegoat, one who will elicit less sympathy in the long run. In this vein, history has, time and again, shown the value of using a close associate as a scapegoat. This is known as the fall of the favorite. Most kings had a personal favorite at court, a man whom they singled out, sometimes for no apparent reason, and lavished with favors and attention. But this court favorite could serve as a convenient scapegoat in case of a threat to the king's reputation. The public would readily believe in the scapegoat's guilt. Why would the king sacrifice his favorite unless he were guilty? And the other courtiers, resentful of the favorite anyway, would rejoice at his downfall. The king, meanwhile, would rid himself of a man who, by that time, had probably learned too much about him, perhaps becoming arrogant and even disdainful of him. Choosing a close associate as a scapegoat has the same value as the fall of the favorite. You may lose a friend or aid, but in the long-term scheme of things, it is more important to hide your mistakes than to hold on to someone who one day will probably turn against you. Besides, you can always find a new favorite to take his place. Authority. Folly consists not in committing folly, but in being incapable of concealing it. All men make mistakes, but the wise conceal the blunders they have made, while fools make them public. Reputation depends more on what is hidden than on what is seen. If you can't be good, be careful. Baltasar Grecian, 1601 to 1658.